You are listening to AccessUW, a podcast series brought to you by the University of Washington Office of the ADA Coordinator, where we highlight insightful discussions, informative interviews, and valuable insights about accessibility, equity, and inclusion, all within the realm of higher education with experts across the UW. In terms of accessibility, each podcast and a transcript are made available at the Office of the ADA Coordinator's website at www.washington.edu/ADA. Well, welcome back to another episode of the AccessUW podcast. Today, specifically, we're talking about the Campus Climate Survey and how we really measure the sense of belonging on our UW campus, on our 3 different campuses, as well as our medical system through this really important instrument that this is our second time doing a Campus Climate Survey. Today, we have Jillian Morn with us, as well as Bree, our typical ADA host. Bree, wanted to say a quick hello to our listeners.
Hello, everybody. Here's your ADA coordinator. Happy to be with you again.
And we have an incredible guest today, Jillian Morn with the Office of Educational Assessment. Jillian, would you mind giving a little brief introduction of yourself to your listeners as you're new to this podcast?
Sure. So as Toby said, I'm Jillian Morn. I'm the Interim Director of the Office of Educational Assessment here at UW. I started in 2019 as a research scientist, and I was the primary analyst on the 2019 climate survey as well.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you here and answer some questions about the Campus Climate Survey, especially as we talk about disability representation, as well as just accessibility of the climate survey and the overall importance. So I kind of want to first start back. Well, actually, let's take it from a base level. Jillian, can you explain to us what is a climate survey?
So Campus Climate Survey is one of the few times that as a university, we do a census survey, meaning we ask every single student, staff, faculty member, medical center employee to take a survey, and giving the opportunity to the entire campus population to share their experiences living, learning, and working here at the UW. And it's an opportunity to collect data at scale around sense of belonging, satisfaction, and experiences on campus.
Great. Thank you for that little overview. And I know we originally did a climate survey in 2019, and now we're doing another one in 2025. Can you talk maybe about the longevity of these surveys, as well as the motivation behind kind of getting capturing moments in time at this university and how that it can be beneficial?
For sure. So, like a lot of initiatives at the university, there's a lot of factors impacting why we are doing them at a certain cadence and why we are choosing to engage in them. One is the diversity blueprint recommended that we do regular campus climate surveys. Other being kind of this state mandate. So Washington Senate Bill 5227 that was recently passed mandates that every institution of higher education in the state of Washington that is a public institution must do a campus climate survey every 5 years. So we have several different mandates and internal motivators to regularly conduct a climate survey. Back when we did the 2019 survey, we decided based on that diversity blueprint that we would aim to do them every 5 years, which is aligned well with kind of this external compliance mandate as well. But also just from an internal perspective, it's important to regularly assess and check in. So we're excited to have this 2025 survey as well, so that we can look back on some of those 2019 measures and compare, because after the 2019 survey, several departments and groups around campus made some significant changes, instituted different policies, introduced different programs. So regularly repeating climate surveys also gives us a chance to check in and see if we were able to move the needle on some of these items.
That's great. And Bree, before I go to you and kind of ask you your experience of the 2019 survey and your involvement there, I kind of want to talk about the big elephant in the room as well, too, of COVID. and how that significantly also impacted their survey of maybe the questions that we were trying to draft in 2019 is drastically different than 2025, just as the ways as our learning, living, and working environments have completely evolved and changed over time. So that's just one note that I want to make as well too, of just the differences between these two surveys as well too. And we can definitely talk more about that, but let's keep staying in the 2019 survey. So Bree, could you, I know Jillian came, if I'm correct, came kind of on the back end of the survey of really working on the analysis when she came to the UW. But Bree was the ADA coordinator at this time, and was asked to provide some feedback and engagement with the campus climate survey. So Bree, could you talk a little bit about the 2019 process, what the goals and the intentions were, and maybe from your perspective as an ADA coordinator, as a disability advocate, what was your hopes from this survey specifically?
Yeah, no problem, Toby. And I also appreciate gonna challenge some of my memory pulling here a bit since this was 6 years ago. Uh, so I was a part of a broader team, which at the time, as Julie mentioned, the diversity blueprint process and the University Diversity Committee, all of those members were actively engaged into subgroups and areas to make sure that things were aligned. What we were going to get out of, ideally out of the survey, right, would help that work, and because that was all pre the current new requirement by the state legislative body in terms of having a requirement to do a survey. So as a member of that university diversity committee, looking at one, I making sure that the third party vendor, right, had a good set of questions that in my area of interest, right, were covering disability, making sure it was an accessible survey tool, or at least asking questions to put those needs out there. So there was more of a broader connection to it versus something more direct. I think that was in part because it was a third party vendor who was in charge of putting everything together, and we used a set of standard questions that were asked, so we could compare ourselves to like other national peers. But there were some learnings in that, and I think that's also contributed to what we've done this year, or plan to do this year, to have a little more local flair versus using some of those standard question sets. Um, so those are, it was I think the first time we had done a campus climate survey that big, at least in my 12 years at the institution. So I don't know that I don't recall the one that happened prior to my arrival, but it was a big process. Lots of stakeholders involved in the discussion. Not everything got that was desired got put into it, but there was a good, robust discussion about it through that diversity council process.
Thanks, Bree. Yeah, and I think that stakeholder involvement definitely maybe models a little bit more of the 2025 survey. But Julian, I want to ask this question to you of Bree mentioned that we originally went through a third party when developing the instrument in 2019. In 2025, I believe we're not doing that anymore. Could you speak a little bit more to why maybe the importance of having it as something that the UW stakeholders, UW specific staff are being the ones who are actually drafting and writing the survey instead of an external group?
That is correct, Toby. So the 2019 survey, it was important that we worked with a third party vendor because, as Bree mentioned, it had been so long since we had done a campus climate survey. So it was really helpful instead of starting from scratch, working with a nationally known, renowned group that had a standard instrument so that we could compare certain things and work with their expertise. Now, the 2019 instrument benefited from several working groups and different groups on campus that could provide feedback on how to tailor the questions to fit our population. But the decision to have the entire survey created and run by the Office of Educational Assessment here at UW for the 2025 survey means that we will be able to create an instrument that is reflective of the UW. So that was a really important change for 2025, is really looking at the old questions from 2019 and saying, how do we make sure this sounds like us, that this is our voice, it's more familiar with our terms, the terminologies we use on our campuses. We really wanted it to sound like the university asking itself, how are we doing? So by having Office of Educational Assessment work really closely with the climate working group and then schedule meetings with different stakeholders across campus, we could get more feedback and more lived experience from the campus community and input that into the survey instrument that we were able to craft.
That's great to hear that it's going to be more in the UW voice this year. I think that's going to be much more in tune with our audience and hopefully improve the results of the survey as well too. So I started hitting on this of maybe the differences between the 2019 survey versus the 2025 survey.
Yeah, so the 2025 survey is based on the 2019 survey, but different in several key ways. So one being our goal was to make it a much shorter instrument. So we looked through what elements were collected in 2019 that weren't necessarily as beneficial for us to collect or analyze, and we tried to make it a much shorter survey taking experience. I mentioned earlier, we really tried to employ more plain language. So making all of the question text a little more accessible in terms of plain language, in terms of sounding like the community, and using more terms that we use to refer to different buildings and places and whatnot on campus. Another important change from 2019 is the inclusion of certain sections of the survey. For example, we have a section on remote work and remote learning. This was not something that we needed in the 2019 survey, but post-COVID, we need to ask about remote or hybrid work schedules, flexible working schedules, the availability of remote courses for students, and their satisfaction with what is available to them. Since we're on this podcast, I think one of the big changes that I feel really proud of for the 2025 survey is the approach that we've taken to collect data about accessibility on campus. So the 2019 survey had very limited questions about campus accessibility, and they were limited to just individuals who disclosed that they had a condition or a disability. For the 2025 survey, we took this approach of universal design, asking all members of our campus community how they engage with things like parking or building accessibility or accessibility of web documents and websites, so that we can get a better idea of how everybody navigates campus, feels like they belong on campus, and feels like they have access to the resources that are available here. So I'm very excited to see how we are able to collect that data and then make some good actionable changes based on this more universal design approach.
Toby, I'm going to jump in here and
Please
give
do.
Jillian some credit because I don't think she's going to necessarily toot her own horn and then say, I'm going to toot her own horn. Jillian was a fantastic campus partner in this area of accessibility and really looking into the problems that were with the 2019 survey because it was kind of like product from a third party vendor using some standard sections, and there was not as much customization that we could do in these areas. And as her and I looked at the data post, right, the delivery of the survey in 2019, a series of things came up, right, of like, wow, we didn't really capture the voice and representation of disability in the ways that we would like to. So she has done a fantastic job to really be thoughtful and apply her knowledge and professional expertise to still get the tool to be great and get the assessment done, but to really be thoughtful and strategic about how to have accessibility show up in ways that aren't just for people who answer the question if they have a disability or not. So I'm excited for this institution to have some, I think, more robust data on this topic, no matter if you identify it as a person with a disability or not.
Yeah, adding on to Bree as well too. All the kudos and flowers go to Jillian for all her work on this specifically.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I do want to talk about kind of the importance of the results of the survey, but I also want to talk, and you started hitting on this as well too, Jillian, of kind of the importance of the questions themselves. And for me, I see this as really an educational opportunity. Yes, we're trying to assess climate, we're trying to assess individuals, folks with belongings, but at the same time, we are identifying what is important to us as an institution, what values that we have, and seeing your inclusion of universal design and your inclusion of accessibility, putting that at the forefront for all people to answer those questions, not just individuals with disabilities. Of course, yes, there's a disability specific questions that we'll definitely get to. But I just wanted to also give kudos to how we are messaging to our university population of when they're taking this, of this is what is important to us, this is what our values are, this is what our mission is as a university. So shifting that more into the results, Bree, I'm curious to hear, as well as Jillian, because I know Jillian did almost all the analysis for the 2019 survey, but kind of talking a little bit about the results of that survey, of maybe how it was beneficial in the terms of disability and accessibility to inform different projects or initiatives, and maybe where it was lacking. And then we can kind of talk about the changes that we made to the 2025 survey. Either of you want to kick us off here in this question about the results?
So I can briefly start. So as the ADA coordinator, I was heavily invested in having this first chance at data um, in this form, right? Looking at our broader institutional landscape when it came to the disability questions. So from a time perspective, 2019, I was, only a year into this role, and really interested to know what this kind of baseline was going to say. So from a data perspective, I was looking at representation. How are people answering this question posed about if they self-identify as a person with a disability or have a health condition that may impact access in some capacity? And one thing that was really interesting for me to see was there was a higher rate of self-report than it was reflected, at least on the employment side, at the time. That has changed, but at the time we were seeing higher rates of self-report in this climate survey than we had seen in other places. And there are also more uh, statements about where their folks were having challenges within university systems, or processes that they are trying to engage. So that was really informative. And then just to see how people would answer questions based off their lived experience as a person with a disability generally in the survey to kind of get a look at that. So that was a great baseline. And it also illuminated areas of like, oh, we need to ask some of these questions maybe a little bit differently, or get a little more detail that we didn't get. For like one example, as Jillian mentioned already, there was questions that were a little more basic, focused just on physical access in certain spaces. So as she mentioned, earlier, we're expanding and asking questions more about websites or documents, or some more differently worded questions on university processes and places where people can engage and have access in those places. So there was some good data that we got because we hadn't had anything like that for a good 10 years, or more. And so that was great to have that baseline. And what I'll end on before I give it over to Jillian here is I did have her come and present to the ADA and Accessibility Steering Committee key findings that came out of the survey, specifically related to those who identified as a person with a disability or had some sort of access barrier that they were discussing. Because at the time, again, in 2019, and this probably was like 2020, really, by the time we had the results out, the ADA and Accessibility Steering Committee, which is made up of university leaders, executive level leaders, we were looking at what are areas that we need to focus targeted projects on, right? Not just to ensure we're meeting our compliance requirements, but where can we move towards really building more accessible systems, programs, etc. So it was informative for that leadership group to hear the lens of those who did the survey with this particular lived experience and represented um, class of employees and students.
And this really speaks to why we do campus climate surveys, is because to understand the institution itself from an institutional research perspective, the university can say, hey, Bree, can you let us know what percentage of students or what percentage of staff have requested formal accommodations from the university? And that gives us one measure of our community and disability status within the community. However, that is very different than the community itself self-disclosing a disability status. So campus climate surveys give us this alternate way to understand the institution itself and allows people to self-disclose in a more anonymous way about their lived experience and things that occur while they work or study here on campus. And speaking to something that's very common for all of the sections of a campus climate survey. So one, we want to understand our population. What are the rates? What is the breakdown demographically or how people respond to certain questions? Benchmarking those experiences. So in 2019, this was the percentage compared to 2020, 25. And And three, to identify and target where we want to make changes, where we want to target resources and policy changes for the next 5 years.
Thank you both for that. And Jillian, I'm curious I know Bria was talking about the 2019 stakeholder engagement, but how did the 2025 stakeholder engagement look specifically for the disability community?
So I can't speak to how it was in 2019, but I can tell you for 2025. So for the 2025 survey, there were definitely individuals on the campus climate working group that could speak to the lived experience of those with a disability, including both Toby and myself. And once we had a draft of the instrument, we were able to share it with specific stakeholders. So other than working directly with Bree to make sure that this instrument spoke to what we were hoping to measure compared to our 2019 instrument, we were able to share a draft with two groups, the affinity group DSFA and the advisory group Disability, Accessibility, and Inclusion here at the university. Shared the instrument with them and then had several listening sessions with those groups to go question by question and really talk through our rationale for including them and phrasing them those certain ways, and also getting their feedback so that those questions could better match their lived experience. And we got some really wonderful feedback. We all have blind spots in our research, even when you do great research trying to understand what our best practices and survey questions. When you actually speak to individuals who look at these questions and want to see themselves in these questions, you get different and really valuable feedback. So I'm really grateful to their time and their expertise, and that we were able to improve the instrument by actually talking to the people in our community.
Jillian, and I know myself as well as many of the members that you interacted with as well too in these advisory groups and affinity group spaces are just very grateful for you and making sure that lived experiences are specifically driving how we shape and ask these questions so people can really be seen in the survey. So I think that is such an important part. I'm also curious to talk about more so the instrument itself. As folks know from the podcast, and maybe if you're on the ADA office website, we do have a new federal rule to ensure that all of our digital content is digitally accessible. So I'm curious of how you integrate digital accessibility and just accessibility in general in the actual building of the survey.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we host the survey on our institutional license for Qualtrics, and part of that review process starts in our office. We have a wonderful staff member who uses a screen reader to go through every single question and provide really actionable feedback to improve that user experience of navigating through using a screen reader. After that, we take the instrument to our UW IT accessibility office to go through the entire instrument, provide recommendations for how we can make sure that is more accessible. Of course, going through the national standards, international standards to make sure it is 504 compliant and YGAC compliant. And beyond those technical elements, that revision process is really important to us to take that more universal design approach so that every single question has more plain language, is easier to read, will be translated into several languages so that members of our community where English is not their first language can still feel like they can take the instrument fully and understand it. And even taking design approaches like how long are our question prompts? How many statements are in a matrix question? Because that gets really cognitively taxing if you're reading through 8, 9, 10 statements in a matrix question. So taking several technical and design approaches to make the instrument more accessible for everybody.
It's amazing to hear about how both in the design and implementation of we're really promoting access here. And to circle back on the 2025 survey, I'm curious, Jillian, if you could let our listeners know of when the Campus Climate Survey will be coming out, and also maybe why folks who are maybe listening to this podcast or reading the transcript should actually take the survey themselves.
For sure. So the 2025 Campus Climate Survey will be released April 22nd and will close on May 22nd. So we'll be open for a month. And I would ask, please, please take the time to complete the survey when you are invited. This is your chance to have your voice heard. This is your chance to influence policy, practice, where we target resources. This is your chance to share your lived experience with the university. The more data that we are able to collect, the better we're able to say, this is what it's really like living, working, learning here at the UW. We need that robust response rate. So I'd ask, please take the time to complete the survey instrument.
So, Jillian, I first want to ask, once the survey is complete, I know we had unit level reports and different reports in 2019. What will reports look like this time? How will people be able to access this data?
So, like in 2019, we will be doing campus level reports. So, these will be comprehensive results for every single question on the survey for each of the campuses. Um, these reports will be shared out with the campus community and will be publicly available to review. So in 2019, once the data was returned to us from the third-party vendor, we cleaned, analyzed it, and put out unit level reports. So these were PDFs of limited number of results for each of the units. So people could compare how their unit is doing compared to their overall campus. And those were really helpful to look at a baseline of how we're doing compared to how overall campus is doing. But we got several custom report requests after that. And in general, these static unit level reports didn't really allow people to disaggregate by certain demographics or really kind of do a deep dive into that. So for 2025, once we close the data and start that analysis, we will be doing those campus level reports again. But instead of doing unit level reports this time, we are actually going to do a Tableau dashboard of those selected results, so that any member of the campus community can look at some selected results disaggregated by different variables, such as disability status. So putting the data and the results back in the hands of the community to really understand and do their own deep dives to see how the campus community responded.
And Jillian, my last question for you today, or before we kind of get into where folks can find the survey, is I'm curious of, I know there can be a lot of hesitancy and a lot of concern of folks disclosing their disability, sometimes to a university, sometimes to a survey. I'm curious to know what measures or protections are in place for individuals' data in terms of this. I know you mentioned the dashboard, but can you speak a little bit more about what protections are in place for any individuals that do disclose or say any identity or demographic on the survey?
For sure, campus climate surveys ask a lot of sensitive questions about sensitive information, including protected health status elements. So off the bat, the 2025 Campus Climate Survey is both confidential and anonymous. So when individuals get their survey link, they will be asked to sign in with a single sign-on using their net ID. And that is only to verify university community membership. Once they've signed on and verified that membership, their net ID is run through a one-way hash and removed from their survey response. So there will be no mathematical way to figure out what net ID is attached to what survey response. We are not even collecting IP addresses associated with survey response. So within Qualtrics, there is an anonymous survey mode. So we will not be collecting any IP address or location information of anonymous respondents. So that's the technical side. From there, the data will only be accessed by research scientists in the Office of Educational Assessment. Once the data is closed and cleaned, we will make sure that there's no identifying information. So if somebody disclosed their name or said something directly identifiable in any of the open-ended comments, we would make sure that that is suppressed in the data. And from there, we have a data sharing policy in place that is a little bit different from the 2019 climate survey process. So because we worked with a third-party vendor in 2019, we had to go through an IRB approval process. Therefore, if any individual researcher wanted to get access to any of the raw data for secondary analysis, they also had to go through an IRB approval process. And in 2019, we also had a data embargo. So we had a certain amount of time where if individuals wanted to request custom reports or access to the data, we said, hey, we have to prioritize getting out the campus level reports and the unit level reports. Once those are done, we will then open it up for qualified IRB approved research projects. 2025, similarly, we're going to have a data embargo. It looks like we will not be fielding requests for any kind of data until January 2026. But We are not doing an IRB for this survey, the climate survey this year, because it is institutional assessment. It is internal knowledge about the university to improve policy and practice. So as a result, we will not be fielding requests for secondary data analysis through IRB. We are going to limit the survey to just analysis conducted within the Office of Educational Assessment in order to improve institutional practice. So raw data will never be shared out with anyone, and the data that is collected is anonymized and confidential.
Thank you, Jillian, for highlighting that. I think that's going to make a lot of folks feel a lot more comfortable because it's scary when you don't know where your data is going to go, especially in today's age. So I really appreciate you highlighting that as well too.
For sure.
So below this podcast, if you are on our ADA office website, so that's washington.edu/ADA, you'll be able to see a big slate of resources, which will include the Campus Climate Working Group, and link to the Office of Educational Assessment, as well as hopefully the survey once it is published as well too. So feel free to check out all those resources for your continued learning and continued awareness about the Campus Climate Survey. But Jillian, that's all the questions that I've had for you today. I just want to give a big thank you for being here, as well as a big thank you for all the work that you put into the survey and driving lived experience into the questions and accessibility throughout. I'm really excited to see where how this data was going to be valuable for our next 5 years, and see how it shapes our 2030 survey as well too. So just a big kudos to you. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Toby. Happy to talk about the survey.